I know you've had challenges as well in your life. Let's talk about some loss that you've had. Can you tell us what happened with you and your wife?
Well, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but when we were single, when I was in 770, I was a big boy. They began to do the organized genetic testing for what's called genetic recessive diseases, which is a unique category of illnesses because it's recessive, which means you have to have two genes in order to have a child with a
Mm-hmm.
particular illness. And the organization that did it, Dar Yesharim, came to 770 where I was learning in the late 80s, and they asked us to test. And I didn't test. It's very simple. Had I tested, my wife and I probably would not have gotten married, because we're both carriers for a disease called Tay-Sachs, which is a terrible, terrible disease. And the children suffer incredibly, and they have a very short life expectancy, as did our son. When we got engaged, so there was a standard text that the rebbe would write to every bride and groom on the occasion of their engagement. And for us, he added an extra word. And I've discovered that this extra word doesn't necessarily mean that it's. He wrote the word Machon. It's correct. The standard language that the Rebbe would use, it should be in a good and auspicious hour, and he's going to mention us by the resting place of the previous Rebbe. With us, he added one additional word, Nochen. It's a correct shidduch. And I've since discovered that that word was added to people who suffered something with their children. So he was our third child. His name was Menachem, and he was born within Shloshim of the Rebbe's passing, and his bris was actually on the Shloshim. Gimel Menachem, 1994 was his bris. And he lived 5 days short of his fourth birthday. So for the first 2 years, we kept him home, and it got harder and harder to look after him. And then we put him in a facility which was near us, here in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, and we would go see him every single day. And we had two children before, and during his illness, we had two more children. Our fourth or fifth daughter, depending how you want to count it, was born a couple of months after he passed away. And that was an ordeal. It was an ordeal for us. It was an ordeal for our children. And it's a very, very long time ago. Most of our children were born after all of this occurred, or at least they don't have any real recollections of it. Although, interestingly, many of our children feel to have a kinship with the little baby that they never knew. It's very odd. And it's just a part of who we are. It's part of it. It grew us up. It was very exhausting. And
How did it affect your relationship with your wife?
well, we
Did
both.
you both react to the loss the same way, or was there a difference?
Well, there's two parts to it. Okay, there's dealing with the challenge, and then there's dealing with the loss, and they're very different. And I must warn you, my wife is sitting right here, so
Listening
I have to
carefully.
behave. Yes, well, there are no. This is so long ago. We've really had opportunity to work this through before, during, and after.
Right.
To my wife, she was his son, and she had to take care of him. To me, it was raw pain. And one of the hardest things when you deal with these kinds of issues is when you disagree about something fundamental, and there's just no room to compromise. There's no way to make both people happy. And it's torturous to deal with the reality of, quote, getting your way, or, quote, not getting your way.
Well,
So
what was it that you disagreed about?
I'll tell you. The first issue was my wife wanted to keep the baby home as long as possible. And I would have been very happy to put the child in a facility. Right here in Kingsbrook Hospital, there is a ward that used to be called a Tay-Sachs ward, because Kingsbrook Hospital is a Jewish hospital, and this is a Jewish disease. Today, because of Dar Yesharim, we should talk about that for a minute, they've virtually eliminated all of these genetic diseases, and thousands of families have been spared this heartache because they do this testing, and before a couple meets, they exchange numbers, and if they're not compatible, they don't meet, they don't go through what we went through.
Mm-hmm.
So the first issue was keeping the child home, and the second issue was once we simply could not care for him anymore. I visited him every single day. Every single day, I would go after work, 10 o'clock at night. I'd go and sit in his
Mm-hmm.
bed sometimes till midnight, and I would study. I remember they did a report on him, and they wrote 0 to 3 months intelligence. He was a 3.5-year-old. We were so insulted by it, but it was the fact. His brain had deteriorated, and I did it because my wife wanted me to, and I did it. I did it. I did
You
it.
did what because
I
you
visited
did
him
what because
every
you're
single. My wife
oh,
wanted me every single
because she
night.
wanted you to meet.
Yeah,
Right. Wow.
and according to her, I did it with a whole heart. There was no grudge. But
Yeah.
when he passed away,
Mm-hmm.
I was done. I had done all my mourning, and my
Mm-hmm.
wife began to mourn.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I remember it, that was probably the most difficult part of the entire ordeal. Um, we people helped us. We had some influence, but we knew instinctively, and it was something that we talked about a lot, that the most important thing through this challenge was to stay together as a couple. And when
Mm-hmm.
I talk to people about our experience, I equate it to the axle of a wheel that has many spokes. The spokes are the children, the axle is the couple. When couples go through challenge, the nature of pain, the nature of suffering is to withdraw. I just think it's not, you just withdraw. And when I think about it in hindsight, we withdrew even from from the people closest to us, the people who loved us the most, who
Right.
wanted so much to be there for us and to help us. It's very tricky to be the brother or the sister of someone who's going through this kind of a thing. But
Sure.
people withdraw, and they withdraw from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew with a certitude that the most important thing is that we have to remain together as a unit. And I think we did that very well. And it was important for Menachem, for the child who was ill, and it was important for other children.
Mm-hmm.
I'm married 35 years, and God knows I have no complaints. Maybe it's been a
Do you
long
think
trip.
everyone withdraws? Like I find sometimes people like I know I always withdraw and I go inside, but I see some people like go out. They go out to others. They let others, help them or let others be a part of their orbit, rather than withdraw into themselves and into their own pain.
Well, I can't answer that question because I'm not an expert and I didn't study it.
Right.
But
But both of you did that.
it's
Right.
conceivable that you draw other people into your orbit from a
Mm-hmm.
distant place
Mm-hmm.
rather than the people who are already in your orbit. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, it's possible that you look for new people to draw strength from when the first place a man should draw strength from is his wife. The first
Mm-hmm.
place a woman should draw strength from is her husband. Or to say it
Mm-hmm.
alternatively, you need to stay together as a unit. And it's
Mm-hmm.
the reality is that oftentimes couples become so estranged when they struggle like this that
Mm-hmm.
they lose their sense of intimacy, lose their sense of couplehood. It's a terrible
Right.
mistake because besides the fact that they're hurting themselves, they're hurting the people they're trying to help. And I think we knew that. We were very young. Remember, this is 30 years
Right.
ago, and
Wow. How old were you at the time?
I was just 30. I was less than
Mhm.
30 when Menachem was born.
Mhm.
My wife wasn't 30 when he died. We were
Wow.
little kids. We were very young, and the
A-
physical energy that it took, we could
And
never do it.
how did you cope with the fact that both of you were in different places? Like you said, after he passed away, it was over for you, but her mourning just began. So did you understand what she was going through? How did you come to? You're talking about staying connected and united, but how do you do that if you're both in such different places?
Well, first of all, this is an actual story. My wife felt that we should do things a certain way, and she knew that
Mhm.
I had very different feelings about it. And so she called people very close to her, very wise people, and they told her that there are certain situations that you simply can't please everybody, and you have to make one choice or another. And
Mhm.
some choices were done my wife's way, some choices were done my way. They were black and white choices, which means somebody was losing. And the most important thing is to
Mhm.
accept. You're dealing with a
Mhm.
reality. You want something
Mhm.
done a certain way, and it's impossible to make everybody happy. So you, instead of being miserable the whole time and saying, I told you we should have done it, each one of us accepted the place where the other person was and the decisions that we made, whether they liked them or didn't like them, completely. And
Mhm.
I think after Menachem passed away, so I needed to be there for my wife. And it was very difficult.
Mhm.
For me, that was the hardest part of it. I don't remember, but we got through it. We're still here.
Why was it the hardest part to see her
Because
her mourning at that time?
because I was exhausted. I was
Mhm.
just used up.
Right.
I was
Right.
exhausted. I was used up. And she was taking care of him. Literally, even though he was
Right.
in the hospital, she was taking care of him. And now she had a loss.
Mhm.